Hi, my name's Greg Martyr. I'm the Executive Chairman of Capital Metals PLC. We have the Eastern Minerals Project, which is one of the highest grade mineral sands projects on the east coast of Sri Lanka.
Greg, thanks for joining us this morning or this afternoon, your time, Oz. We've not met or spoken before, so I'm kind of interested in this project, having sort of seen the base deal last week, I think it was, with Energy Fuels. I think people are talking about mineral sands at the moment. So what's your background? What have you done before?
My background's pretty much resources. Either on the investment banking side, I was in Deutsche Bank, and we had our own business called Griffin Partners that we set up. It was bought by Standard Chartered and ended up being the global head of mining and advisory for Standard Chartered. But my corporate side of things, I ran the international business development for Normandy Mining, which was right across the Africa or right through the Americas, some exotic places in Europe. So, I've been looking at a lot of projects over the years, critically, whether I could live in a place, whether I could operate in a place, and here we are in Sri Lanka. Now I'm on a couple of boards, but this is my main focus.
Right, and how did you pick this project up? Where's it from?
It came through an old colleague, and I was on the board for quite a while with him, and then it just became appropriate that as we got to the funding stage and the critical stage of getting to FID, that my experience was more appropriate. So I took over. I was chairman, and I took over as executive chairman middle of last year.
Right, and what are we looking at? Obviously, it's mineral sands, but what are you looking to produce and sell?
So it's 17 million, just over 17 million tonnes of resource, pretty early stage of that. So we think there's a lot of upside in that, at a grade again of over 17%, which is literally one of the highest grade mineral sands projects in the world. You look at any chart, it's an absolute standout. So primary products will be ilmenite. That's about 50% of revenue, and zircon, a bit over 20% of revenue, but also rutile and garnet. And we've got at the moment, we've got a 4-stage process that will ramp up production over time. We'll go through to HMC, so heavy mineral concentrate initially, and then magnetic separation, and if it stacks up, non-magnetic separation over the next sort of 3 years. Capex of about 80 million. So not a huge amount of capex for that first 10 years, and it's a pretty high margin project.
Well, I want to get into this. I do want to get into it because it's been sort of an interesting ride. It seems that you've been on. Let's start with maybe some of the economics and perhaps why you're excited about it, and maybe why you've been able to kind of get some of the funding in place for it. So, what could this look like economically?
So we did the PEA in April 2022. We came out with that. That had a base case valuation of $155 million US and an upside case of 235. Our market cap at the moment at about bit over 4.4p, I think last time I looked, is about 15 million US, right? So that gap is massive. There's a reason for that, and we'll probably touch on that before. We went through some real problems over the last 18 months in Sri Lanka with a particular minister, which I'll explain. Hence the opportunity. From a margin point of view, it's not like a gold project or a base metals project. We can just pick one commodity and say that's the margin. There's various levels of concentration over time, but as I try to break down the simple maths. We'll on our base case pricing assumptions, dollar per tonne of ore revenue is about $45, and our total cash costs are about 19. So, that's pretty rare to get over a 50% margin in these types of projects.
Right, but you're going to need to finance it. Talk about low capex, but it's also with the low market cap. And I guess your logo gets from a low base is the opportunity. But, how do you fund this thing? How's this thing actually going to get built out to be able to produce that revenue? So
we have announced, it's about 45 days ago now, that we're in a co-exclusivity with two parties. We've been talking to the LB Group, which is the old Lomond Billions, where they're the largest pigment manufacturer in the world. They got a market cap of about $6 billion. They've been closely following the project for a long time. We've signed an MOU with them, and we've also signed an agreement with Sheffield Resources, And Sheffield Resources, they just recently built the Thunderbird project, 480 million Aussie project with Yansteel in Australia. Really, really capable guys. They've also put some money into Capital Metals to take a 10% stake, and they got an option to take another 4%. So, and that brought a guy called Bruce Griffin on the board. And I've known Bruce for a long time, and I call him Mr. Mineral Sands. What he doesn't know about mineral sands, you don't want to know about. So he really helps. He brings a huge amount of experience to the board, and so we are hoping that in May we'll be able to announce a deal with one of those parties. Basically, the deal is that they will fund us into production, and we'll give them a 50% interest in the project. LB's not coming. If the LD deal comes on, they're not coming into Capital Metals, just Sheffield will. They're already in, regardless of whether it's Sheffield that wins the race or LB that wins the race to fund the project.
Right, so a bit of competitive tension there, but Sheffield have kind of, shown their mettle, as it were, by picking up equity now. The MOU, I guess that's a non-binding situation to kind of give them access to data to be able to assess whether or not they move forward. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, they've all...
Okay.
LB finished their DD quite a while ago. Sheffield are pretty much through it. They've said that at the moment they don't see any showstoppers. So we're in the advanced stages of negotiating the documents.
Right, okay.
And 15th of May is when that exclusivity finishes. Look, I'm hopeful we can come out before that time with a successful deal, but these things can sometimes drag on.
Right. Okay. So competitive tension we always like. Near-term decision making, and what does that look like? Say one party or the other or both bid for this. You've kind of set the terms under which you are prepared to move forward in terms of how much they put in for this 50%. And also 50% of what, etc. When do the deal terms get made public?
They'll be made public as soon as we sign the joint. It's a joint venture agreement that we're signing, and that joint venture agreement will last the life of the project.
Okay.
And so that's when it'll become public.
Okay.
And as to who gets chosen, it's are they there at the finish line, and then it's up to the board to determine which party they like and which terms they like the best.
And in terms of kind of geopolitics at the moment, is there any sort of pressure on you from the market or bankers or other types of funders now or in the future would say we prefer, homegrown, or maybe LB is fine too? I mean, was it just a case of, best deal, best bid wins?
Well, the deal structure we're talking about is equity funding, and we're not talking about debt funding. We don't want, we're hoping that we won't have any debt funding. So we're not being dictated to by anybody. We're prepared to give up 50% of the project and 50% of the upside. There's a lot of it. We know we can't fund this on our own in our current state. We've known that for a while. And we've always wanted to bring in more expertise to get it right. Okay.
So if you can get through without a debt, then there's obviously, that'll be a good situation. Okay. More of that anon. I don't want to dive too much into that until you've kind of got something on the table, quite frankly. But talk about it's about state they're in, because obviously you've come off the back of, a period of time of uncertainty around licenses. So what's happening? You mentioned one of the ministers or prime ministers. What's going on there?
Yeah, we Capital Metals as the existing entity has been there since 2015, and we bought it off a local company that had started exploration in 2009. So this is not an overnight story, certainly not an overnight success story. It's taken a lot of work. We finally got licenses in August of 2022. And then, what we've now found out, driven by the previous Minister for Environment, which sits above the Mines Department, they came up with all sorts of reasons to try to cancel our licenses. And we know that they were trying to give it to a third party, which we assume they were associated with. The minister had appointed a chairman of the Mines Department, and they just ran total subterfuge, and it was a massive fight. We had to take them to local Court of Appeal. We threatened international arbitration with a big hitting lawyer. We've been lobbying all over the place. The purported cancellation got squashed through due process. And that was actually a process set up in the Mines Act where we had the right of appeal. So the justice worked, and that was actually to the secretary to the Ministry of Environment. So that was quite helpful. We know that by having our local Court of Appeal action, that was a big stick, and that the government was very nervous at getting a lot of egg on its face over this situation. The bizarre thing in the end, the minister ended up being kicked out by his own party, and because he went against the policies of the party, and they took him to court, and he ended up being kicked. He literally lost his position. So I think we had a little bit to do with it, and I think there was also a little bit of luck. So now what we've got is a situation where I think our tenure is a lot stronger than what it was even before we got the licenses, because they've seen what we will do if somebody wants to play silly buggers. But we've now got all the entities saying, and Sri Lanka went through an economic crisis. I mean, they've had a terrible time over the last 10 years with all sorts of things. They had the Easter bombing in 2018, and they've had constitutional crises, and then change in presidents and in quite a colourful way. And that resulted in an economic crisis. And now the IMF has had to step in. And the IMF gave them a funding package and said, as part of that funding package, you guys have to enact anti-corruption legislation, which they've now done. So there's a change. Of course, there's still sort of the old guys, running around that think that they can do whatever they want, but there is a massive change, and we've got really good cooperation with what's called the Board of Investment, and that sits under the Ministry for Investment Promotion, which the president is that minister, and his state minister is a guy that we've got to know very well, and he's he just doesn't take any crap, and he's really good to deal with. GSMB, they completely changed the management, and we're getting proper cooperation instead of over the last 2 years. So I think we've got a much better platform to now start ticking all our boxes to get the approvals done. So, we've got some key immediate deliverables. The first one is getting that funding deal in place. So we're very confident of that, but fingers crossed. And then it is all hands on deck, because everything will be funded by that partner that comes in, to get to the final investment decision, which we're hopeful will take place sort of end of the year, probably more likely Q1 next year. That's how we got, quite obviously a lot to do to get to that point.
It's so interesting to me with a couple of things that you said in there, and I've been sort of subject to licensing issues in West Africa, where similar, to use your phrase, silly buggers happening, where in this case it wasn't anything to do with environmental concerns. It was just that was the stick used to beat you, or perhaps block you, but they actually wanted to hand it to someone else. It was never about environmental. So, but can I just stick with that, because obviously Sri Lanka see that as a very beautiful country. The tourism revenue is quite powerful there as well. So, in terms of those kind of environmental concerns, are there any kind of future roadblocks, any other kind of future groups, NGO sponsored or otherwise, which could stop you further down the line? So
we did the full EIA. That was a very lengthy process, and so we got the approval for that in 2021. That's your ticket to then go and get a mining license. So we got the mining license. Just following up on that. That involved everybody, right? All the CCD, which is the Coastal Conservation Department, the CEA, which is the environmental impact, basically the central authority for environment. Obviously, the ministry, the GSMB, the mines department. So everybody was involved in it. The issue that we ran into last year was nothing to do with the environment. It was literally the minister trying to cancel our licenses, and he was doing it on the basis that there's an ownership issue. Once you get into a mining license situation, under the Foreign Exchange Act, you're supposed to have local partnership, which we didn't, because when you're 100% exploration, you don't need to. You can be 100% foreign owned. So we went, okay, we don't agree with what you're saying. We changed the structure. We got a local partner in anyway. And he still said, no, we're cancelling your licenses. So it was very clear that they just had an ulterior motive, and they were just trying to find an excuse. So look, we're through that, but it was very painful. Share price, when we did the RTO, we were sort of 20p, and even before all that happened, we were, reasonably okay, running around 10p. We went to 1p. We had to do a financing to stay alive at 1p. And that hurts, right? But we got it from all of our existing shareholders. And other than the Sheffield money, the fundraise we've done over the last sort of 15 months since that horrible 1p one have all been pretty much existing shareholders. So very strong support.
Right. Okay.
And now we're well funded. We've got sort of, £2.5 million in the bank. And if we sign this deal, we don't have any funding obligation ourselves. So that's just for our overheads, and obviously insurance, if we need to tip in at some point in time.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I took away from that, obviously, with the IMF stepping in, to your point about not necessarily wanting debt in your own project, is once debt's involved, I think outside parties do have control in this case, to your benefit. So I kind of liked that. The third point I recognise is the fact it's been a pretty tricky equities market anyway that you've kind of gone through, irrespective of the shenanigans on the ground, but staying alive was kind of key to this. Do you think your kind of shareholders, your long-holding shareholders, kind of understood this, forgiven you for this, or and can sort of see a way forward?
I sort of became the executive to sort of rescue the situation, and so I've really only met them in rescue mode, and most of the ones I've spoken to, they put money in at 1p. We've traded, quite healthily above 5p. They're pretty happy. So maybe some of them on an overall average entry point, they're still not there yet, but I think they can see that we are now ticking the boxes, and, I think the company is in a much better position than what it was, even when we had the first 2 licenses in August 22.
Okay, right, and obviously the next couple of months are quite important as well. In terms of announcements to the market. Like you're saying, you've got the potentially between these two bodies, you hope to be able to get the funding for the build for the capex component of it. You are going to presumably need to go back to market just to kind of shore up your own balance sheet. Have you got a sense of at what point you'll do that, and if so, how much for?
We shouldn't need to go back at all in the next. I can't see a reason at the moment, right? The only reason is in one of the deals is if we're going to agree a budget to get to that financial investment decision. If that stretches out for whatever reason, then we might have to fund a share of any overrun in that, which is fair enough. But we've been working pretty closely with them on the budget and all the items and ticking those boxes. So otherwise, we've run pretty skinny. We don't have a corporate office. Our overheads are tiny, so we we have no need at this stage to go out and raise any more money.
So the past couple of years that you've kind of learned, or the business has learned how to run efficiently. It's kind of, for me, when I kind of look into the smaller companies, and I'm surprised at the sort of G&A costs, because they're kind of, some of the management are living the dream because they continue to be paid big salaries irrespective of what the company's doing. So, allocation of capital in that regard is quite important. Can you just talk about because obviously you've got to, you need the capex to build out at site and obviously at the port. So are you expecting the funding to be able to, cover both of those locations in terms of cost?
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
okay.
So the first step will be going and building the mining units and the concentration plant, which will be a mobile concentration plant. The big infrastructure will need to be on a site like the port. We are actually looking at, we're just redoing the whole approach to the logistics. There's been a few changes in country as to, what's available. Some other big ports are around there. We may not go to the Olival port. It's sitting there, it's idle. It's ready to go. It can only draw to 8 meters, so that limits some of the ships that you can get in there. So it's there. It's a big block of unused land as well. So, and it's close to the project. So good optionality. It's good infrastructure, but we might be able to do better.
Right. Okay. So in that regard, given the, have you now got all the licenses and permits that you need? And if not, what's to come and how long will that take?
Well, that's the process to get to FID, right? So we've got to go through and a condition of both deals is that we have to have a certain amount of HMC under license, certain amount of tons of HMC under license before we can push the button on the construction decision. We're pretty close to the target right now as to what we've got under license, but we want to add a lot more. It's a balance of, you've got to get land access, and it's a balance of, and there's some private landowners out there. There's also government land, which we're starting at. So there's a little bit of, we're not going to go out and get every single mining license on day one. So we need to strategize exactly which ones, where's the low hanging fruit in terms of where we start. So, but I'm very confident that the way things are going, we will have more than enough probably in the next 3 months to satisfy any conditions.
Right. Okay. So still a process to go through, but early indications are, and given the new setup with the government, you feel encouraged with conversations at the moment. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Back to the kind of economics of how you do this thing and management and basic curation of investors' money. You're coming from a low base in terms of the market cap valuation, etc. Funding you explained, but obviously because of the kind of size, so you don't want to kind of give away all of the upsides. Certainly, if someone's coming in for a bit of equity and the size of the project, you don't want to give that all away. How do you stage that kind of growth, that kind of ramp up, so that you can sort of become self-funding in a way and capture more of the value yourselves downstream, as opposed to giving it all away? Yeah,
it's a good question. And probably the best way to answer that is if you look at our PEA, that had a total capex spend of $81 million. It actually only, because of the stage process, so we go first 550,000 tonnes into HMC, that's cash flow positive. So our actual funding obligation or our funding requirement is only $37 million if we stick to that staging. Now, what we will discuss with either LB or Sheffield, because they've got a bigger balance sheet, is whether we accelerate that. And maybe the funding requirement's a little bit more than that 37. But, if we did it ourselves, we would have self-funding at 37 million.
But what can this look like? Because what I'm trying to work out is, if someone else is coming with the funding and, the volume of funding, you've got to kind of protect your shareholders, you've got to, protect the company in a way. And because you're going to be judged on how much money you make, and what the kind of growth opportunities, the blue sky opportunities people love to talk about. What does the future hold for you? Because you've come from damage limitation, protect the company, protect the asset, and build and get this thing funded. I think you can probably tick a lot of those boxes, or mostly tick a lot of those boxes. But the future's got to look bright as well. So, what's in it for shareholders if they stay involved?
Look, we know that this at 17 million tonnes, it's not a huge project in terms of our global peers, but there's a huge amount of upside. We're only at our average drilling is only about 3 meters, because in a few cases that's where the water table is. But we know that in some areas it goes to 14 meters. We haven't been able to commit the money to more exploration and more drilling, which we now have. So we're in the process of kicking off that drilling campaign. So the upside, I think, is huge. But we wouldn't have attracted an investor unless we shared that upside. So our deal is whatever we've got, they're getting 50% of it. And we're on that journey together to increase the tonnes. And ultimately what I'd like is, we know there's other opportunities in Sri Lanka. We would have worked this hard to get where we are. We are the most advanced development project in Sri Lanka. There's only one that's in production in Sri Lanka, and that's a government one called Lanka Minerals. It's been in production since the 60s, but there's a lot of resource around the country. So we would love to be that first sort of private mover and consolidate some other opportunities. But first things first, and get this thing funded and running.
Yeah, walk before you run, right? Okay, so this kind of stepped approach is your way of kind of protecting the future upside. Okay, understood. Just in terms of your message to shareholders now, then, is around timing of this, because some people get impatient, and some people expect results overnight. I think, again, given where you've come from, timing of this is going to be important, but you don't want to also missignal the market. So what can you say to them?
Yeah, as I said, we stated before, the exclusivity finishes in middle of May, and I'm hopeful that we can get a deal by then, but you can never guarantee that, because dotting the I's and crossing the T's might drag you out a little bit further. Then it's what's the process to get to that FID? I think that's probably a 6 to maybe 9 months process. The construction to get into cash flow is only 12 months for that first stage. So we should be producing by the first quarter of 2025. 2026.
I was going to go.
We're in 24 already.
That's good going.
Yeah. It's
I know.
Yeah.
So I feel about it. Okay, and you're doing, and just for people who are perhaps looking in at this, perhaps new to mineral science, you're doing FID straight off the back of a PEA, which is kind of unusual step in mining more broadly, but for mineral science, the process is somewhat easier, because the process, but perhaps you could explain that.
Yeah, we will. It's an incredibly simple process. It's particularly from my background, mainly in hard rock in resources. It is a simple excavator at the front end. It's mining cells of 50 meters deep by 150 wide, continuous mining of those cells. We rehabilitate as we go. So it's literally rip, slurry it to a gravity-based concentration plant. It starts to get a little bit more complex when you get into the magnetic separation, and then the non-magnetic separation for the zircon and rutile, but for the ilmenite and the garnet in the first instance of the magnetic separation. It's a well-trodden path. And there hasn't been that many step changes in the technology. So I'm easy mining, low capex, not well-trodden path, and plenty of offtake customers out there that we know that we'll have the product that will be attractive enough. I mean, hence LB's interest, right?
Okay, so no one's learning on the job. There's not new technologies involved. It's simple step and repeat stuff. With regards to and I get again whether LB or Sheffield, 50% allocation with the kind of 50% which you have and you can sell into market, or presumably maybe even to your partner. Again, that's a kind of well-trodden path. You're not having to open up new markets.
No, it's a pretty. I mean, as I said, I think the ilmenite is about between 40 and 50% of the revenue. It's a sulfate ilmenite. It's it'll go straight to the pigment producers in most cases, and most of those are in China.
Right. Okay. So that's the route to market.
Yeah.
Most. Yeah. That's kind of rich. Well, obviously we talked about base resources earlier, and energy fuels. That's obviously for them. That was kind of going into the US market. So there are markets outside of China, folks. Can we just talk about your share register at the moment again? So they've been through a tough time too with you. Is there anyone in there perhaps looking to get out because this isn't quite what they kind of bought into, or what's their resolve to stick with you?
There is, I know the top 5, probably the top 10 very well. It's pretty sticky, right? They could have got out before. I think they can just see the huge gap between our share price now and where we should be, and the fact that we're on the way up, not the way down now. So, that's why I think it's very sticky. So, it's not to say that, we get this thing funded and we have a pop that, somebody might look to let some go. I mean, we've seen a bit of a change in our shareholder base. We've got a lot more retail interest, since the 1P raise, because, we've seen quite a few traders come in, which I think has probably subdued the response to some of our positive announcements, but that's life. right? Our job is just continue to deliver, and we know that the share price will eventually follow. Yeah, it's been a tough market, and sometimes delivering good news is an opportunity to sell in volume. That doesn't last forever.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll see. If that's the case over the next few weeks and months as the news stories come out. Now, talk to me about something, because there's one of my favorite CEOs, a guy called Alex Black. He runs a sort of gold mining company in Chile, and he talks about the secret to mining is social. He's not a ESG warrior or anything. He's just saying it's what he's done for the last 40 years. You've got to get the buy-in locally. In terms of, you've given us a bit of a clue earlier when you talked about this, fighting against this previous minister holding things up. You obviously had a fair bit of support locally. So tell us about sort of that engagement and why they took your side of the table.
If you go to these beaches, and this is a beach that's not there is other than Aragon Bay in the south of the project, it's pretty low population, and just below Olival, there's a bit of population up there. Otherwise, it's coconut farms, peanut farmers. There's not a lot of activity, but the beaches are pretty dirty, and they're black, right? Black sands. So we're going to return the beach to a better state than what it is today. And I think we've got a fair bit of buy-in with that. But your mate Alex is completely right. I joined Normandy Mining from banking, and Robert de Crespigny, I don't know if you remember him, but he was the CEO and a fantastic CEO. And he just pushed into us social license right from the safety. Safety was first, social license. So your people got to come home in the state that they arrived, and then it's social license. And if you're without social license, those two things, you're not going to be able to operate. So it's crucial. First thing in most meetings is almost every meeting is safety, and then ESG related issues, in particular what's happening with the society. Now, as they start to see we've got funding, people come out of the woodwork. We know that it always happens, and everyone's there'll be people with separate agendas. We just have got a good team there, multilingual, because we're actually dealing with Tamil, Sinhalese, and Muslim faction in the area. So it's pretty interesting dynamic over there. And we've got our staff, which comes from each of those groups, so they can relate to them. But I think now we can, when the money coming and meaning that they're getting closer to mining, actually means we can spend a bit more on that communication and just bringing some of them in, and they will start to see jobs. For most of them, it's where's my job? Because it's a very poor part of the country. I think it's a poor country, and this is a very poor part of the country. So, once we'll be able to generate over 300 direct jobs, multiplier of that in a developing nation, just sort of more than 5 times.
Right. So jobs and taxes is great, but just very specifically, rather than just tip your hat to it, I mean, have you done anything at a local level? Have you, are there any initiatives which are currently underway or previously were underway which will restart? I mean,
we've done clean water treatment in a few areas. We have clean beach activities. There's schooling contributions. COVID was a big one. So right through COVID, which was tough for everybody, but they really did it poorly. There was a lot of contribution in that. Probably over the last 18 months, while we were focused on making sure we still had a project, I think it's probably been paused. And of course our budget needed to be paused as well. So we're looking forward to sort of kicking that off and accelerating that whole program.
Greg, I appreciate you making time to speak to us today. As a project I was sort of interested in, and I suspect there are a lot more people sort of looking at mineral sands at the moment in the context of critical minerals projects around the world. Appreciate you giving the backdrop. Hopefully you'll come back on again and maybe get into a bit more detail in terms of the project itself, and you'll have a bit more news. So appreciate your time, Greg.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Look forward to catching up next time.